Alright, hello YouTube, and welcome to a game that I've not really properly covered before on the channel. There is one video of a fun glitch I ran into, but this game is Kerbal Space Program. I'm a very big fan of this game. I have played this for years. It's actually what got me into doing game design. It was the very first game I ever modded, way back on the old demo version, before even planes were in the game. Today, rather than Astrox, which I've been doing recently, which is not gone yet, it's kind of on temporary hold. I wanted to do something a bit different for a while, and also I've heard that Astrox is going to have some story content added quite shortly, so there'll actually be some proper story, so I'm kind of going to maybe wait a little bit for that to show up. So instead, we're going to do a little bit of a campaign through Kerbal. And I have a little bit of an end goal for our campaign. Now, we do have some mods. I won't go over it too heavily because I don't remember at this point. There was a lot of fiddling this morning to get the mod loadout working. But the primary ones are some visual mods to hopefully keep everything looking nice. And the near-tier suite of mods. So far future, near future, all that sort of thing. The goal I'd like to manage is to build effectively a colony ship. I'd like to build a colony on the furthest out planet from Kerbin, which is Eeloo. Now, that's going to take a bit of work, to say the least. We're going to have to fund it. We're going to have to build a quite substantial ship capable of sending it out there. Ideally, because one of the mods we do have is the contract pack, I'd like to fund it via the construction of a space hotel. Or perhaps casino. I had the option to do both. The casino is very difficult to build, but the money might be worth it. Because the casino requires 5 asteroids docking together to build. So I don't know whether we'll go for that or the hotel, which still requires like about 100 Kerbals worth of space. Neither of them are easy, quote unquote. But we'll consider how we'll maybe get there. Have a little look at the tech tree, see what sort of thing we can work with. We have got the community tech tree, so it goes a lot further. But we also, as I said, because we have far future in that, we can have, for example, warp gates at the very far end. Or things like fusion torches. And jump drives. Yeah, there's some cool stuff at the end of this. We also have, because we have far future technology or whatever it's called as well, or near future, some of the things like the Vaspir, which could be an alternate way of going far. I think a lot of these nodes are empty, because they're designed to also account for mods like Interstellar. But a fair few of them have got stuff right at the far end. So that's going to be interesting to work with. We're basically on normal settings. And I guess for now, we need to take on our first missions. So, if you haven't played Kerbal, if you never played Kerbal Space Program, first of all, give it a go. You might like it. It is a game about managing your own space program. You've probably gathered that by this point, but to do this, you have to build your own rockets and things, take on various contracts, and, well, fly into space and go do stuff. So, we're going to build our first rocket. And we're going to go quite simple. I'm going to take a quick stack of our options, but I think we're going to go for the onion. Parachute. Yes, it looks a little bit silly, but we'll go with it. Science module. Yeah, why not? And I'll go over a little bit in depth later on into why we're doing these particular things. So, that'll do it for our first rocket. Actually, have we got fins? We do. Okay. So, to explain a little bit about what we've got here, because I figure I might do a little bit of a guide on like how somebody who's new might get through a campaign. We'll call this the let's call this the onion. Why not? To explain this rocket quickly, we have in the middle a capsule. This has got our crew member in it. This is where Jeb's hanging out. Obviously, ideally, we want to bring Jeb back in one piece. Normally, with your Kerbals, if you lose them, they won't respawn. Jeb, Bill, Bob, and Valentina will. The basic four, so you can't technically run out. But it takes them a while, and ideally, we'd like to not lose them. So, in order to bring our capsule back in one piece, we have a parachute. That will slow us down, basically, and allow us to not fall to the ground so hard the whole thing explodes. We have a mystery goo capsule, which is a research module. Exposes, well, mysterious goo to the air, or whatever the environment is at that particular point in your journey in space. and will net you some data. You can either transfer it back by an aerial, as long as you have the range to reach headquarters and also some power to actually power said aerial, or you could simply bring it back to Kerbin, which is the planet you start on. So we're going to do that. I'm going to move that. So, to actually get us up into the air, because we have to launch our first vessel, we have a solid rocket booster. We're going to put an orange, yellow stripe on it even. Solid rocket engines are very basic boosters that they use in real life. They basically are a literal can, effectively full of solid fuel, hence the name, which once ignited will burn for a while and then it will burn out. You can't shut these off once they're activated, at least not with these ones that are in game by default. Once you've ignited them, they're going to burn the whole way. This can be fine. They're usually best used on bottom, lower stages, where you are going to drop them anyway. And for our first rocket, these will do fine, and also it's our only choice. The fins around the bottom are for stability. I like the onion pod's looks. Kind of interesting looking, meant to be based on the Soviet ones, I believe. But it's not the most stable, so we've got some fins on the bottom to generate a bit of drag, keep the bottom of the rocket, well, at the bottom. This should be all we need. Oh, and then moving this up, the onion actually comes with a decoupler built in, so it can separate itself from the rest of the rocket. Because if that parachute had to land everything, we'd be a little bit close to the weight limit. If it's just got to land that lightweight little pod and the crew pod, should be perfectly fine. And we shall launch. As I said, I'll try to do a little bit of a basic tutorial of each, or at least while we're building, explain why I'm, well, making whatever choices I'm making on that particular mission. Money I'm not too worried about on the first launch. There's no way that costs anything like a whole budget. But it is something we'll have to keep in mind, because your rockets do cost things. As mentioned, I do have some other mods installed, so to explain those quickly. This one I'm actually not sure. I had not seen this one. I assume it's part of another one. We have Hyperwarp. Oh no, well, not Hyperwarp, it's called Better Time Warp, which is a mod that allows us to warp faster than the default, which will be useful on long-haul flights. We have a few random bits and pieces, most of which we're not going to need, but one we'll probably be using a lot is this one, Science Alert, which can tell us when our various science equipment can be used, because it's quite easy to lose track of what you've done and where. So before we launch, we're going to take a quick crew report. That's our Kerbal inside the module, which is Jeb in this case. If we turn that on, we can see him. Basically going like, hey, what's going on? In this case, he seems to be chilling out quite happy inside his little space capsule. And I believe that's about it. Oh, no, we have our mystery goo. We also take some data from. Now, some science experiments can't be reused again after you've activated them, or rather they need a scientist to specifically scrub them out before they can be reused again. But Jeb is not a scientist, he's a pilot, so he can't do that. But what he can do is, well, fly a little bit better. We'll get to what that means in a moment. In fact, I think it's time to launch. We're going to quick save in case it goes wrong. I'll be doing that a lot. I'm not going to disable it. We will activate SAS, which is something pilots specifically could do, or AI cores. That will try to keep us pointed in the same direction we're going, basically, or that we were already going the last time we let go of the controls. Additionally, throttle up to max. Actually, no, we don't even need to throttle up. We've got a solid rocket booster. It doesn't throttle. Yeah, we just have to hit space to stage, and we should go. Away we go. I'm also going to tilt us very slightly forwards, so that we don't come back down on the launch pad and break it. We disable stability assist, because we're going fast enough that the rocket will stabilise itself. The fins at the bottom. And we are away. As you noticed, very short flight. But we have actually got quite a long way up. We've actually already got a few miles up. At least a couple of miles up. And if we look at our contracts, launch our first vessel is complete. Gather scientific data is not yet, because we haven't actually returned the data. But we have data on board in the pod and in the science module. So we'll disconnect the booster. Don't need that anymore. And we shall activate our parachute. Not coming in tremendously fast, so we don't have to worry about the parachute ripping. If you come in very quickly, or you're going very fast, you'll notice that a parachute icon will go orange when it is iffy, whether it will survive if you deploy it now. or red, which is it will break if you deploy it now. You don't want to deploy your chutes while they're red, because they won't help you at all. They'll just rip off. Parachutes do normally come with spare chutes, but you'll need an engineer to repack them, and you can't do that during re-entry, obviously, because everything's on fire. That booster's about to hit the ground, I believe, any second now. Or perhaps not. Did it land and not explode? I think it landed and didn't explode. I'm actually quite impressed by that. And also a little bit confused. Yeah, piece of the right. Although, to be fair, it might not be the whole booster. It's probably more likely just a single fin. We can time warp to accelerate time. While you're in the atmosphere, you can only do what's called physics warp, which goes up to 4%, and it can be a little bit iffy because the physics tend to act up a little bit if you haven't got a really fast computer. No, a lot of it survived, apparently. But once you're in space, you can time warp up to, I believe, 10,000 times by default, and we've got better warp, so we can accelerate it even further. Bonk. And we can recover the vessel. If you land on another planet, you can recover... Well, if you land on Kerbal, sorry, you can recover your vehicle to the Space Center. You'll get a bit of money for recovering what's left of it. Increased the closer you are to the Space Center. Basically, you don't have to spend as much going out there and recovering it. And you'll get back any crew that are on board, and you'll gather any science. So we've gained 18 science. We gained some funds for the capsule. So we get 2,000 back for that, and also about 75,000 from the both the contracts and the world first. Because each time you do something new, like for example set a speed record or an altitude record, you get a bit of money, and sometimes a little bit of science as well. So our first two contracts are complete. We've got money and we've got science, so let's take some new missions. Now I usually go straight for the world first ones to escape the atmosphere and orbit after the first two, to launch a vessel and recover some science. Mostly just because they're easy, they pay a decent amount. That's basically all I need to say really on that. We have some more science. Let's research some new parts. So starting here, we can research new things. At the moment, with our level 1 science center, we can research things that cost up to 100 science. Beyond that, we'll need to upgrade the building. So we can get to about there on the tech tree in terms of how far along we can go. But we don't need to worry about that now. We're going to take basic rocketry, which comes with our first liquid engines, our first fuel tank, the fuel flow breaker, which will stop fuel from flowing between places, a couple of smart parts, which are effectively they're a way for us to automate our rockets somewhat, and we might have a go at using some of these. A larger liquid fuel engine. In fact, we've got 3. We've got a, if I remember correctly, a reasonably efficient one engine with a gimbal, which means that the nozzle can turn a bit to the side and steer itself. A early tier one that's just basic, and a small one that's low power but quite efficient and lightweight, as well as a larger liquid fuel, solid fuel booster even. So we'll have that. These early ones are all generally useful. There's no real wrong way to go about it with the first ones. And we will have engineering, which includes a new antenna, a decoupler, as its own separate part for separating stages, a thermometer, which is a new science part. It will get us some different experiments and gain us some more science. Another antenna that folds out. A slightly larger version of the antenna we've already got. Another type of decoupler. This has a... I was going to say spin stabilizer. It is not. A reaction wheel system inside it. Interesting. And another variant of it, of that same part. So we'll have that. We can't afford to go up any further, so for now, we're on to the next thing. Now, we can upgrade the buildings. I don't think we're going to do that yet, because we don't need to, but if you right-click on your buildings, you can upgrade them all up to 3 times. For example, our basic space center, or vehicle assembly building, we can build a vehicle that's made of up to 30 parts. And the launch pad can launch a vessel that's up to 20 meters tall. Not sure why it's 21 meters, but I believe it's 20 meters tall anyway, and weighs up to 18 tons. While mission control, for example, we can have 2 contracts at once. This mission control and a tracking station are one we're going to upgrade very soon. And we'll get to why when we get there. But for now, we're going to build our second rocket. So, effectively our next missions are just to go higher and further. So we're going to try and do that. So we're going to take off the solar fuel booster. And we're going to fit something with a little bit of control to it. To fit a liquid fuel tank. And we're going to fit a tug, I think. We're going to try this. Now, how do we know how far this can go? We should also change the name. Onion 2. Well, we have a Delta V readout. Now, there is one in-game down here, but I prefer MechJeb's one. MechJeb is an autopilot that we will be using later on. But you have to get to certain parts of the tech tree to unlock its features. So, early on, we're still going to be doing things manually. As you can see, there's a bunch of numbers. Most of these are not important, but the ones that are is this number, thruster weight ratio, TWR, and delta V, both in the atmosphere and in a vacuum. Delta V is how far you can go in space, basically. It's how much you can change your current speed by, and that's what gets you places in space. Thruster weight is, basically, if it's above 1, the thrust you have is enough to lift your craft in Earth gravity, because I think it's the 1 is like 1g or 1 times normal gravity for that planet. So on the moon, we actually have effectively enough to lift us 8 times over almost. So on Kerbal, we have enough to just about lift us a bit more. Usually your lower stages, what about like your very bottom launching stages? Want at least 1.5 thruster weight ratio. I don't know quite why, but it's what you need. So this should work. This will get us a little bit of distance once we're in space. It's not very efficient in the atmosphere, maybe 600, but it's almost 1500 in vacuum. So, below that, we're going to have a decoupler, so you can separate whatever's beneath us. And we're going to go for a flea. We still have very high thruster weight ratio. And we have not very much delta V, but it's a little bit. We'll then do another decoupler. And we'll have a hammer. Delta V's a bit thruster weight's a bit lower, but it's still above 1, so we're still good. And we have a bit more thing. Now this won't get us to orbit, I believe, because I believe you need about 4,000 to get to orbit reliably. But it will get us to space. We're also going to fit a little bit more science equipment. We're going to fit 2 thermometers. Because, if you remember, we've already done one reading at low altitude. We'll use that to take one on the launch pad, and then we can take another reading from the other thermometer once we take it off, and a reading from the science board, and also a crew report. Basically, depending on where you are, every quote-unquote location will have its own science experiments to do, and that includes altitudes as well. There's usually a low altitude, high altitude, low orbit, and high orbit science experiment for most science devices. There's a few exceptions, but that's the basics essentially. We'll activate stabilizer. We will throttle up, because when we get to this engine, the liquid fuel engine can be throttled, so we will need control of it. In fact, we'll shut it off for now, and you'll see what I mean. So, we are going to take our quick temperature reading on the launch pad. We will open these up ready to take a reading. If you right-click to bring up the window on them, normally if you click off, it'll go away. But if you click the little pin icon, it'll stay up. So that'll save us a bit of effort having to click on it when it's in the air. We'll also pin U, which is the crew pod. Save, and we shall launch. Alright, and we're off. We will tilt a little bit so that we don't come crashing down on the launch pad. Because one thing I didn't mention last time, I don't think, is that if you hit the buildings in the Space Center hard enough, they will explode. And they are very expensive to repair, so you really don't want to do that if you can avoid it. We'll observe the mystery goo. We will observe the temperature, and we'll take a crew report. We have done a bit more science. We'll then activate the next solid rocket booster. And then I will realise I've forgotten to put fins on this stage. Forgetting to do things is practically a way of life when it comes to Kerbal Space Program. So many times you'll you'll realise, for example, that your rocket is staged incorrectly and you've just thrown away a perfectly good engine. Whoops. Yeah, that was not really intentional. We've still set a world first, so we've still made a little bit of money. But yes, I did not intend to do that. We'll get on to why that went wrong in a minute. But yes, so that is, again, as mentioned, an example of things can and will go wrong on your space program. Sometimes there are issues you can deal with when you're this close to the ground. Or rather, when you have a bit of time before you hit the ground and you've got something that was designed to come back and land on the planet, it's not a problem. There's a bit of a problem, for example, for that fuel tank. Yep. But we're fine. I'm actually going to adjust this so it opens a bit closer to the ground. Or I might be slightly too slow, and it will open up before I get to that. Yeah, to quickly talk about what I was trying to do there, you could adjust at what altitude your parachutes open and the atmospheric pressure required for them to open. Additionally, with this, planets have a sea level, which is where the sea is, but the terrain is not going to be at sea level for the most part. So if you switch between the two, it will show you either how far you are above the planet's ocean or how far you are above the ground. Now, there's reasons you'd use both. The ocean display can be good if you're traveling over really mountainous terrain that will constantly be going up and down and it doesn't give you a good reading. If you're coming into land, you're probably better off with the ground display that will actually show you how close you really are to the terrain. But yes, we shall land this and we shall launch another rocket of the same type. And this is why you time warp, because descending takes a little while. That was why I was intending to cut the chute until we were a bit closer to the ground, but it's fine. We landed in one piece, and we will be able to take more science readings from a higher altitude next time. Yes, that's the other thing. You don't necessarily lose everything if your missions go wrong. You can still recover a lot of the time, at least something. But that's also why we quick save, because I could have quick loaded there. If I'd been a lot further out in space, I might have been a lot more tempted to do so. We have made some more science. We've made some more funds. And Jeb has not gained any XP. He hasn't been far enough. But your crew will actually gain experience as missions go on. You click on the launch pad to load a rocket in without having to go through the assembly building. But if you go far enough, your crew will gain experience. They will level up and they will be able to do more. Scientists, I believe, can research better and can... I believe they can get better results at the base stations they deploy. Engineers can get more power out of base stations they deploy and can repair, I believe, higher tier parts. And pilots gain more options for their stability assist system. So by default, you only get the keep you going in the direction I'm going, but there's other things you can unlock later. Right. Now we do still have the in fact, we're going to recover this craft. In fact, we're not going to launch this yet because I remember we do still have the problem that when our first stage separates, we lose control. But this is fixable, and we're going to go do that now. Recovering your vessel on the launch pad, I believe, gives you the full cost of it back. Well, I suppose I can check. That was 5,407, I think. Double check in a sec once we go into the assembly building. Kerbal's loading screens are not the worst, but they are a thing. Yeah, 5,407. So we've got our full value back. We're going to fit an additional set of fins here. Yeah, there we go. We'll call it the Onion 2.5. Oh, we'll just do the Onion 3. We'll keep it as the same version number. Ready for takeoff. And with the extra fins, we should be more stable. I could go into the actual physics of how some of this stuff works, but I'm going to assume that either you know the basics, or at the very least you can still take away like, oh, okay, so that's the thing I can do to avoid this problem, kind of thing. Take off. Okay, put it on the right stage. But as before, we will tilt slightly to lead us away. You might have noticed as well, when it came apart last time, we lost a lot of speed, which you can see here, very quickly, which was because effectively we began to tumble, so we generated loads of drag because we're presenting a big blunt side of a rocket into the air rather than a, well, not a super pointy shaped thing, oh boy, but pointier anyway. That was interesting. It just did a flip and then recovered. I've not seen that before. Oh, we'll activate our liquid engine anyway. Oh boy, that's spinning as well. I'm starting to remember why I normally use the pointy pod rather than the onion. You know, to cut the engine until it's pointed in the right direction, then cut it and restart it. At least then we'll be thrusting forwards. No, okay. This may need some more research and design. I did mention that I had played this game a lot. I didn't necessarily say that I was... should we say perfect? Or that reliable? No, to be honest, the other part of this is that the onion pod is great looking, good for replicating Soviet stuff, but it is not necessarily all that reliable. It is weighted oddly, and it is just generally a little bit weird, as well as being the round shape. What I believe happened with our fins was that the pod was essentially too wide and was blocking the fins from gripping into the air properly, effectively. Tell you what we could do. We could try. If I can get it to rotate over there, we could try and push this thing into the ocean. Actually, I don't think we're going to manage on reflection. Tell you what. I'd like to push it into the ocean, but we do not have very much control at the moment. I don't know if that engine can... Gimbal? Do we have a gimbal on that engine? It cannot. Yeah, we can't gimbal the engine, so we actually have no steering at the moment. So we've got stuck in this weird rocking motion. We do have some torque on the pod. I'll explain that later on. But effectively, spaceships could have what are called reaction wheels in them, which are kind of gyroscopes that you use to turn the craft, like a sort of set of spinning discs. They don't work quite the same in real life as they do in Kerbal. In real life, they will stop working after a point. They become, I think it's saturated is the word. In Kerbal, they do not. So in Kerbal, they effectively allow you to basically, if I just said magically turn your craft, effectively, it's not actually how it works, but it's, again, a good enough explanation. Okay, we're a bit close to the ground. We won't have to fall for as long this time. Now, that would be something I'd be very iffy about doing if we were coming in fast, but since it's Kerbal, I'm used, and I'm fairly used to this planet and how it reacts to things. We're good. But for the next craft, I think we shall switch back over to the more reliable other type of pod. Oh, you know, I did forget to do. I meant to take some science reports which are on the ground, because not only is there science on the Space Center, in several places actually, but there's also plenty on the different areas of terrain around the planets. So just that field area, or that field area around the Space Center also has its own science. We didn't get much science from that. We got a bit of money, but we lost a little bit overall from that, so we want the next rocket to work properly. So while we're here, we might do some upgrades, because we've got some science. We could take general rocketry, which is a round tank top. A Reliant fuel engine, the LVT-30, which is a very standard engine for small size. Doesn't pivot, but it's powerful and reasonably efficient. The Thumper solid fuel booster, which is a big solid rocket engine. It's quite a good choice, this one. This is quite usable. And a slightly larger liquid fuel tank. We could go for stability, which gives us radial decouplers, which are decouplers to detach things on the side of our rocket. Nose cone, a larger fin, and a larger decoupler. Or we take survivability, which will give us landing legs, small ones. Heat shields for re-entry. Another science experiment. Yeah, you're noticing this could be a good option to take early on, because you then get more science that you can then use to unlock more things faster. Radiators, another landing leg, radial parachutes, which are the same as the other radial parts that attach on the side. Service bay that lets us put stuff in it. So parts for universal storage, which I will get to later, because that's its own thing. And another part for universal storage. We are going to take, for now, general rocketry. It is just all around a useful one. We'll take survivability next where we can afford it, but that will be good for now. And I think for our last thing this episode, let's get that rocket we just built, tweak it a bit and make it work properly and try and lead the atmosphere as we've planned. Should be a bit easier now. So, first of all, the pod. It's clearly causing us problems. It's not balanced very well. It's causing us to flip. It will stop our fins working. The other option in the game for the early on for the pods is the one the game started with, the Mark 1 command pod. Carries one Kerbal, and it's a much better shape, that sort of pointy, well, standard shape. It's nice and reliable and will get us to orbit neatly. We don't have any heat shields yet, so it's just going to be that. We'll put a decoupler on it so we can separate it. The other reason we do that is, I think I already mentioned this, but it's for weight, because we only have to land one light little capsule. This engine could do with a bit more fuel, so we're going to improve the fuel tank to this one. Yes, we now have almost 2,000 delta V once we get into space. Thruster weight is below 1, but A, that will improve as the engine runs because it will burn off fuel and get lighter. And B, once you're in space, you don't need more than a 1 to thruster weight ratio. It'll help you do your maneuvers faster, but it's not actually needed because there's no gravity. Oh, well, there is gravity, but the gravity is not a risk of pulling you down to the planet's surface in the same way. Then below that, we're going to take out the small booster. I'm just going to remove that entirely. Place it with the larger one. Because this top stage is heavier, we need a bit more kick. We've still got 1,000 on it, which is actually better than either of the 2 stages had before individually. Then we'll have another decoupler. And we will have a thumper. Very large engine. And we'll also have 4 fins on this one as well. So you keep it stable. We're still within the weight limits. You can check your weight and part count limits by clicking on the engineer's report here. So we've got 20 out of 30 parts. 14 tons out of 18. Height, size and width are all fine. We will now check the staging, because this is what we got wrong before as well. So, goes from the bottom to the top, and this is literally, when you press spacebar to stage up, what will happen? So first stage activates our first engine, good. Then we want it to decouple here, and drop this booster off, good. Then activate the next engine, good. The next stage has got 2 things. That will decouple and activate the next engine at once. That's not technically a problem. So in fact we're going to leave that, but we could press plus to add an extra stage and move them. Then it will decouple the capsule, and then it will activate the parachute. So this is all good. This will be the Onion 4. And we shall launch it. You might also notice, yes, we have above 4,000 delta V. This could theoretically make orbit, if I fly it right. So we'll give it a try, because that is also one of our contracts. Now, that is always a little risky, because if we make it to orbit, we're going to have to re-enter. Now, we don't have heat shields. Now, we should be okay. We are lightweight, and we will have some more fuel to slow us down further. But it is something to keep in mind. How fast you come back into entry can be a big concern, because if you come in too fast without proper heat shielding, you will melt. You will overheat your rocket, and you'll kill any Kerbals on board. So, you've got to be a little careful. Yes, our contracts are there, so let's give it a try. Lift off. It's a little bit more sedate launch than before. You can press F2 to hide the UI, and you can press F1 to take screenshots, and they will actually hide the UI as well if you hide the UI when you take the shot. We're going to tilt over to the side, and we're going to activate this. This will show us the highest point in our orbit and the lowest point. Once our highest point, while we're burning upwards and gaining height, it is okay to tilt over a bit, we'll get to that later. Once this reaches about 85, we could actually stop burning and get ready to put the rocket into orbit. Now, of course, where exactly we'll end up, considering we're on solid rockets that we can't turn off, is a little bit random. We shall see. You notice, the rocket is not flipping this time, it is staying straight. Which is good. And we're also going a lot higher this time. You can see where the high altitude, I believe, starts when it goes to this dark blue colour. That means we have to do science experiments. So that little bubbling noise is actually science report telling us the exact same thing. Fins are getting hot. These little bars mean they're overheating, but we can't actually slow down, so we just have to deal with it. Crew report. Upper atmosphere. And they're just recording what's going on. And we can also take a temperature report. You might also notice the science rewards are higher, because we've gotten higher up. We've gotten further away from Kerbal. Usually the further away you are from Kerbal, or the more difficult location you're in, like Moho, the more your science equipment will get you. Couple that stage. Let's drift gently away, because we're in space now. Well, we're practically in space. The atmosphere is very thin. We are now actually in space. Space in Kerbal starts at 70,000 meters. We have new reports available. And click that to easily access it. So that is the report from our other thermometer, and it's worth a little bit more than the other one. Now we're in space. Quick save. So, that's where we're going to end up at the moment. This grey line is our orbital path. So at the moment, we're going to float up to wherever the top is. It's at nearly 200,000 meters. And then we will drop back down again. We want to orbit. You want to take a quick tip to orbit? Point your rocket here, so it's on the line. Ideally in the direction you're going, and activate your engines. Now, whether we have enough fuel to do this or not, I do not know. But you'll notice the line's moving. Because we're adjusting our orbital path. This is kind of how you get around in space. We'll have actual tools to see what we actually need to do to maneuver later, but we need to upgrade some of our buildings in the Space Center for that. So what we're going to try and do is make it so this is a complete circle that stays above 70,000 meters. Because if it does, then we're not going to fall back in. You don't lose orbital speed in Kerbal unless you're actually in the atmosphere, so we will stay in orbit indefinitely. Now that's obviously bad if you actually run out of fuel. I should mention you can access the map using the M key. But we should be okay, and if it looks like we're not going to make it, we can cut the engines before we get to that point. See, our orbit is gradually increasing. We can actually press Alt and then the same keys for Time Warp, which is those the greater than and smaller than symbols, or full stop and comma, to speed it up. The other thing we want to do is keep on the line. If we let it drift off the line, we actually won't adjust our orbit quite right. And when your orbit starts to skew a bit, when it sort of starts to bulge outwards, if you go a little bit harder, go slightly under the line to the orange, it will push in a bit more, and it'll... it's a bit hard to describe, because I don't necessarily know all the terminology for it, but it'll circularize out a bit more. You get this nice round orbit. And I believe that's getting a bit dark. We have done it. We have entered orbit. Escape the atmosphere. And orbit Kerbin. Hooray! Now we are a little bit high up, a little bit higher up than I'd have liked to be, honestly. Considering we have the heat shielding, so this could go wrong for Jeb. But yes, we disable Time Warp, we can now Time Warp up to the high speeds. What we're going to do, we're going to Time Warp up to the highest point in the orbit, which we can't see at the moment, because again we need those updates, but I believe it's about here. And then we're going to basically point backwards and activate our engines. That will bleed off speed, and it will lower our orbit. If we get it below 70,000, we'll start to get friction from the atmosphere and we'll slow down, which will take us out of orbit and allow us to land. Yes, our lowest part of our orbit very quickly drops. We're going to leave it to there for now because we're quite high up and we're probably going to come in reasonably quickly. So if we take it a little lower, we won't drop into the really thick bit straight away, and we can also activate our engines again with what fuel we have left to slow us down even further. As long as we slow down gently, we shouldn't, keyword, have to worry about burning up. This game's also very pretty. I do have some visual mods installed. You get some quite nice screenshots of it sometimes. Yes, we should be coming in for re-entry any second. This episode's been a little bit longer than normal, but I think that's fine for a first one. Part 1, these might end up being a little bit longer. Kerbal tends to be a little bit of a slow game. Definitely one you need a little bit of patience for. It is rocket science. It's not as scary as some people think, but it is literally rocket science. Right, now that we're... So you can tell which way is forwards and backwards through these little icons on your nav globe, which is showing you which way you're going. This line is the horizon. This little yellow thing, the circle in the middle and the lines on the outside, is forwards, as in the direction you're actually going, not which way's forwards on your craft. This little yellow one with the X in it is backwards. So if we burn backwards, we'll slow down. Should mention for the throttle that it's shift and control to adjust it smoothly. So because we can throttle our engine, we can run it very slowly. Or Z and X. Z will maximize it and X will cut it. We'll just shut it off. So if we speed up a little bit. Our lowest point in orbit will be 20,000 or 27,000 meters at the moment. We stabilize pointing backwards. We use that fuel tank in the engine to shield us a little bit from the heat. Until we slow down a bit. Again, we went a little higher up than I'd have liked, but we couldn't really adjust that with the with our very limited knowledge of, well, what our actual maneuver was going to do to it. But once we gain those tools, we'll be able to make much neater maneuvers that won't waste as much fuel and will actually, you know, get us to the altitude we're trying to be at. Now, I'm not going to be taking any of the satellite contracts that require very precise orbits because I just don't enjoy trying to get stuff on them. It takes ages. I'm not good at it. It's like, nah. But we will need at least some precision. Oh, it is trying to... Oh, we're trying to tumble. Keep that facing backwards. You notice it's a little bit more heat resistant than the rest of our craft. It's soaking up the heat reasonably well. I thought if I disabled speedy assist would keep facing the right direction, but it turns out no, we're a little bit top heavy. The pods are fairly heavy for their size because they've got to contain like crew, life support, shielding, everything, so have to be a little bit careful with that. Oh, camera's changed. That means it now thinks we're actually on a reorbital path, that we're not going to stay in orbit. Now, normally we would have a proper heat shield at the front of our craft protecting us, but again, we don't have any researched yet, so for now, we're just relying on luck and a big bulky engine. This is not normally how you'd necessarily do this. You'd normally want to maybe research heat shields before you went for full orbit, but it's up to you. There's different ways to play this game, and it seems to be working for us so far. We're slowing down, but not very quickly, but that's good. That means we're not getting too much friction. The lower this drops, the thicker the atmosphere, and the thicker it is and the faster you're going, the more heat you'll generate. So sometimes it's best to try and bleed off speed while you're still high up. Another weird trick that can work to dissipate a bit of heat is spinning. I don't know why. I don't know why this works, but it does. Oh, it's not working for us now, though. No, we burned off some stuff. Keep that pod facing back. Lost our science experiments, which is not ideal. Do not burn the pod. Okay, separate the pod. Okay. What we did there was a bit of a panic move, but it appears to have paid off. Oh, you know what else we've lost? We lost the parachute. Newming past. Yeah, not the ideal first mission. I'm not entirely sure what else we're going to be able to do with this one. Actually, no. I know what we can do. Strange enough, though this is not really what I intended to do, this mission actually might not be lost yet, because there is one last thing we can do as an emergency measure, and it'll work especially well given there's only one of us. There's one other thing about these Kerbals that's rather interesting as astronauts. That's that they're pretty tough, actually. Which means we can do this. I'm going to quick save before I do this. Oh. Except we can't. Apparently we can't, no, we can't disembark while off Kerbal surface. Oh no! Okay. That's a pain. Apparently, basically, because of his training, he can't open the door on his craft, which is a problem, because if he could, we could have parachuted down to the surface. So we're basically going to have to hope that the pod doesn't explode when it hits the ground. I don't know that I rate the chances of that very high. So it might be starting off on a bit of a whoops, we blew someone out note, but honestly, I think for Kerbal, what better way to start a campaign? And it'll certainly give us much to learn about. The only slight problem is we haven't gained a huge... I know we have gained some science. I'll just say we haven't gained a huge amount. We can also try and rock the craft about violently to catch more air and slow us down. Which, strangely enough, does seem to be working a little bit, but we are burning electrical power. I'm also not sure how much of it this is actually helping, and how much of it is just... that would be slowing down anyway because of the atmosphere. No, we're going to crash. Oh boy. Well, we made it to orbit and we've already blown up our lead pilot. But that's the nice thing about Jeb. He might be dead for now, but he will be back. And we're gonna cut the first episode there. Again, not quite perhaps how I intended to start things, but it is a start. And next time we will switch to our reserve pilot, and we shall continue onwards, and we'll maybe research some heat shields next time. Hopefully you've all enjoyed the first episode. Remember, I am a games developer as well as somebody who plays them. So if you want to support the channel, go check out the 2 links in the description. They're both to games I've made. You might enjoy them. And I'll see you all next time.